This is Delhi. Please stand by for our next program. This is All India Radio. In the national program of talks tonight, the topic of the discussion is the bane of domestic violence. The participants are Dr. Jayanti Dutta, leading clinical psychologist, Miss Elizabeth Khumallambam, women's rights activist, Amaresh Singh, leading lawyer, and Vickram Bahl, media personality, who initiates and moderates this panel discussion, the bane of domestic violence.
Welcome to the national program of talks. And today, the subject of our discussion is the bane of domestic violence. Domestic violence is a broad subject and in fact covers many close relationships. And that's what makes it so complex. It also covers physical abuse, mental torture, and various other sorts of, you could start from irritants. So because it's a very complex subject, one needs to look at it from various angles. And we're very fortunate today that we have a good panel of an eminent lawyer, Amaresh Singh, and we also have Elizabeth Khumallambam, who's a rights activist, and Dr. Jayanti Dutta, a leading clinical psychologist. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, to start off, I would like to ask Dr. Jayanti Dutta, in fact, about how she sees this subject.
Yeah. Violence, for that matter, in any relationship is indeed very intriguing and dangerous. And more so when you talk about domestic violence. It starts with conjugal relationship and then it spreads onto your primary relationships also. Because when two people are involved in any kind of violence, the people who are associated with them, they also get dragged in. You cannot express what all they go through. It is, as you said, it's not only physical, it is psychological, it is financial, it is to a great extent social brutalization also. And when you emotionally, psychologically brutalize a relationship or a partner in your relationship, you kill that human component, and this is what is worrisome. It is, though people, when you go to the court, when you talk about domestic violence, the focus is mostly on the adults, but the real sufferers are the children, those who stay in the family, and the kind of reputation the family has built in over the decades, it's destroyed.
Yes.
So when you come out of the violence also, suppose you have...
Yes. I want to first talk about how we see the situation today. And Elizabeth, if you can just give us your view as to how the recent developments, especially with coronavirus, keeping people home, keeping people in close proximity, how has that played out? Has it increased the chances of this problem surfacing, even where in many cases where it was underlying? And as Jayanti just said, are children the major sufferers?
Here, in this context, like, for example, domestic violence, or which we interrelate it to gender-based violence, is always happening. Like in a 2018 report in World Health Organization, out of every 3 women, 1 faces domestic violence or gender-based violence or sexual assault. So in this context, while coming to Corona time, because domestic violence, gender-based violence are a subject matter which are underreported, whether it is women or whether it is male or whether it is with child. But one thing that has come out during the pandemic time, that is in 2020 and 2021, that it has increased.
How much has it increased?
Yes. For example, we have network partner in which deals with calls for helpline like this. Before COVID-19, for example, in a day, if a domestic violence or gender-based violence calls comes about 5 to 10 calls in a particular district in Chennai area. During pandemic time, around 50 to 100 calls per day. So it indicates how much is the increase of domestic violence related cases.
Amaresh, that's a big increase. And have you seen that also with cases as a lawyer?
Yes, certainly. I mean, there has been a spurt of cases, relating to domestic violence. But, there's nothing legal about it. It's just a factual situation,
But divorce rates have gone up.
Yes, absolutely. Because these are all related to the changing paradigm of how people are staying together. Obviously, there are frictions, and there is a social angle to it. Legal, so far as legal is concerned, nothing really changes. Legal provisions are always there. It's just that socially, people have been in close proximity, and obviously there have been psychological impact as well. So that has led to frictions, and with the tolerance levels going down, you would be in a better position.
I would like to say that during the COVID, what has happened is you have had a constricted environment. Your ventilations were restricted. So that had an impact of so much of oppressive feeling inside the house. You could not ventilate, you could not go out. So what you did is displacements took place inside the house, and there were more frictions, more violence, and more aggressive outlets, which has caused this violence to go up further. And it has not only restricted only with the two people, the elderly in the house were also affected because of this.
In your opinion, what is the best way to stem this problem?
It's something, when you talk about domestic violence, it should not be restricted only to the gender. It should be the guilty who has to be punished and has to be looked into. Women have taken it for granted in that they will get the protection from the legal forum. The court is with them. So they brutalize the men folk. And unfortunately, the men are so scared that, they don't want to bring it out in the open. Suicides are the options they think of. And this is where I'm worried, because this is something you cannot restrict only to the professional forum. You need to generate community support for this also. So people are hesitant even to approach the specialists.
Amaresh, as a lawyer, she's raised a very interesting point. As a lawyer, when we talk of domestic violence, it is usually, pointed towards a certain gender, and you seem to have a view on that. How do you see it legally? Because I believe there have been some amendments to this in recent times.
Yes. If you look at violence, it has a very expansive definition, domestic violence. There are various verticals which would fall under domestic violence. It is violence against women, senior citizens, children, domestic help, so on and so forth. Obviously, as has been rightly pointed out, there have been spate of cases where there has been a misutilization of law.
Right.
And in such situations, in a layman's term, I would say that there have been amendments in the definition so as to also include men as an aggrieved party. So therefore, there could now, as it is perceived, there could be violence even against men. And laws will be equally enumerated, to kind of cater to all kinds of situations. So yes, with changing times, the law is also evolving. The legislations are in place. Judicial pronouncements are, forever clarifying these laws and expanding their ambit and jurisdiction. So things are moving in the right direction.
Elizabeth, you've been working at the grassroots level of society, and you've seen how things pan out, how things start, how they go further. How can we actually tackle this at the initial stage so that it doesn't spin out of control, and also remedy it, in your view, if it has reached a point where even legal action has got involved? How can we bring people back to the table and make remedy the situation?
At the first context, domestic violence or gender-based violence, which I said it is interlinked, that is a complex issue, because the issue comes from the deep socio-cultural factor that social structure has built up. We all know that the foundation of our society as we know is patriarchy. When you were asking me about the COVID times, people were all inside, stuck in a house. For example, say, I work with a community which is the women workers community, in which the whole family of 4 to 5 persons stay in a 8 by 8 square feet or 9 by 9 square feet in a one-room setting. For example, the women of the house, like she has to look after the children, the husband looking after the matter, and one person, all the 5 people staying together in a house, like the burden falls on her also. And to a certain extent also because of the patriarchal structure of the society, which we considered as part of our life. Since she has to do the burden by herself, and if sometimes she needs a helping hand and all, that become, like, for example, a less factor like that. So when she needs something, or if she asks something, or something has been said about her to do something, she's not able to do it on time, or she's not able to do, or she's saying that I'm tired, I'm not able to do it. Now, what is that matter? Is that because
so
it's
what
not
is the remedy?
The remedy is that gender equality, and that in a society, when we are staying in the family, as we are not as someone is dominating and someone is subjugating, that context which we are staying because of the patriarchal structure, we have to look at it as we are partners. So, for example, if a woman is looking after the household, if she is a working woman also, what men and women, if they equally contribute to their part in household matters. So you feel
that equality is the problem and that is the
That's
solution.
right, because they always think that why should a woman reply to what a man says? She deserves, if she's replying, it's I'm her husband. I have the ownership
I see your point.
husband.
Let me get Jayanti into this. Jayanti, do you think that is the major problem, that we have a situation where we don't have equality between the genders, or is it a part of it?
Not majorly.
Okay.
Because I feel gender sensitization to some extent helps. It is one of the components. What I do in my therapy sessions is I approach with CBT, that is the cognitive behavior therapy. Mostly those who come to me are kind of elite crowd, educated, both are working. And one has to find out the base, like are they really willing to continue with this relationship or not? And if they are, then they come for my therapy sessions, and believe me, it works out. To a great extent, once they are convinced that this is where, we are going wrong, the sharing has to be more. And, you cannot go by a prototype kind of a role playing. That has to be sort of, conveyed to them.
So the first step, of course, as you're saying, is identifying the problem and having all parties involved in the
and let them
situation,
communicate.
Sitting across the table and communicating. Yes. And the most important is the will.
Under supervision, of course, because they cannot sit together and communicate. They'll end up fighting. When they come to my therapy sessions, I make them first have single sessions, and then, both of them, I make them sit and bring out their problems. So very often it works out.
That is a situation where people are willing to sit and sort things out.
Yes.
Amaresh, the problem sometimes spills over, and that's when you get involved as lawyers, and the courts get involved, sometimes the police gets involved. Is it possible to retrieve situations that have reached your level?
See, I'll tell you, I've, whatever ma'am has just said, we are looking at a very constricted aspect of it, which is, the gender part of the violence. But violence spills over, it's not just the gender issue, it's like violence all around and things like that. Now, if you look at what legislature has done, and if you look at what judiciary has been doing, there has been ample movement. There have been ample steps which have been taken. But the problem is at the enforcement level. There are laws, there are judicial pronouncements. Even today, I was reading there was a judgment which said that the police must investigate thoroughly before lodging an FIR because it affects the reputation of a person. It is the enforcement. So whoever is the aggrieved party in a domestic violence or violence of any sort, whether you are prosecuting it under the Domestic Violence Act or various other provisions or the Indian Penal Code, it is the duty to convince the enforcement that they must do a thorough investigation, and it is also the duty of the enforcement on its own to make sure that the investigation is complete and not rush into arresting people. That's where the problem is, the fear of arrest, the very proactiveness of rushing into and arresting a person, without doing a fair investigation. If all those things are sorted out, then what we will have is an end-to-end solution where we will realize that most of the cases which really go to the police or are filed or are brought to a platform are the genuine cases, and therefore when there is fairness and when there is settling of the convoluted facts configured with law, things itself would streamline.
What is the conviction rate, in your view, in these cases?
See, there has been great degree of improvement in this aspect, because there's so much of public pressure, there is judicial pressure in the sense that, investigations, time and again prosecution has been advised by the court to do thorough investigations. There is also a public gaze, which is looking into the matters. So conviction rates have definitely improved. I'm not saying that, there is no further scope for improvement, but it is definitely improving by the day.
Once it has gone to his level, what I find among the cases I've handled, they just grab the menfolk and they say, all right. And, it increases with the intervention of the police people and the legal support they get, that you will be sent to this girl, you'll be sent to this jail, I will ruin your your career, I will ruin your family. These are open threats which are verbalized openly by the people who are handling, which I think should be curtailed, because if you are in a uniform, you are designated with certain responsibilities, you should not kind of exploit that, which unfortunately gets exploited. And the man who is the kind of been in this scenario, that man is totally demoralized, not only he, his family also. Then they decide that we will not resolve this. Even we have a chance, we don't want this woman to be back. I think that is, instead of helping, that ruins the relationship further. So, the police while handling, the lawyers while handling have to be more sensitive. They have to be sensitized.
She's raised a very interesting point that you need to have people who understand these interpersonal relations to implement even the law. Because the final aim is not just to lock people up, but to try and build back relationships.
Yes.
How do you see that?
Yeah, that is the point which I wanted to consider, and then to lay certain facts in front of you all. For example, we are a women's organization. We have women's platform. One thing is that we work into the workplace harassment or to the gender-based violence issues, along with that domestic violence cases or domestic issues we call it, not coming to the context exactly of domestic violence, because all issues are not categorized under violence. For example, in a month, if a woman comes out with cases that I am facing domestic violence, because the ambit of domestic violence extends to both physical, mental, sexual, and other kind of nuances also. So if 5 women came to our organization that we are facing these issues, we did a kind of a counseling before sending it to litigation, because litigation is a complex issue, and at point of time it's a very personal, very family. There are children, and women usually do not want to break up the family. That is what we have experienced.
No, I don't agree with you, because I'm handling a case where the mother is not only brutalizing the father, but also brutalizing the 7-year-old daughter. She makes her mop the floor, sweep the floor, and, threatens her. And physically she tortures her, mind-boggling, She would injure her lips also. And it's a working mother, educated mother. And how do you help such a family?
So, Amaresh, that's the problem. Balance is most important. You have to punish the guilty for what they're doing wrong. At the same time, you have to ensure that the innocent don't get painted with the same brush.
No, absolutely. And, as we're talking about this specific case, what stops the husband from going to the police?
Because the lady says, you dare not go to the police, then I'll ruin your career. And the man is in a private firm. So he says that if I go to the court, it will, it's a time-consuming affair. And then she would be getting the support. As I said, I just now narrated, there is a tendency of the people who are supposed to help these people to side with one particular gender. And, nobody would believe there is a video proof that she has been harassing and brutalizing the child. And in spite of that, the father is kind of not willing to go to the court.
I mean, so, that again is, as I had highlighted earlier, that's the aspect and problem which is at the enforcement and investigation level.
Yes.
Now, if you look at the legislature, if you look at the judicial pronouncements, they are very, very clear. The directives are very clear that there has to be a proper investigation before you lodge an FIR. There has to be a fair investigation and things like that. So again, it's an enforcement issue. Mm-hmm. So, an aggrieved party, if really approaches the matter in a structured way, making sure that the investigating agencies are doing their job in a correct way, things would work out.
That's why I said the community support has to be generated.
Okay, Elizabeth, I believe you wanted to say something.
Yes, because under this context, because domestic violence cases, it relates to case. Supposing if a woman, if it's given like false cases, if she files also during the investigation and case process, he knows that the truth will come out. So from what our experience is that, because we are saying that we should not be biased against men, we should not be biased against women, but for gender sensitivity and gender equality, so that the family at the end with the children do not suffer. But as we have been saying about certain women's issues, we know that some women who belong to a certain category, who have certain class and all, they have more certain kind of power. Even in domestic violence class, it also dissects about power relationship. So what we mean in general is that from what we have been seeing is that if 5 women comes for these issues, only maybe out of that 1 may go to litigation, but 4 of them will not go to litigation because we call both the husband and wife. And according to some session that if they can find out, we were given the option because the consequences of litigation, everybody knows about it. So if it all depends, and one thing, just because that I work with women doesn't mean that we are biased against anybody or any gender. But one thing we said that sometimes, in certain like research that have been done by Supreme Court also, when we were saying, because it's about relations, sometimes women do also compromise and men also do compromise in terms of domestic violence or domestic matters because they wanted both at the same to save. Some people go to the extent of like threats and giving that kind of extreme cases. It is there. It is not there. I'm not
One more component which we should not forget.
Right.
There are certain mental cases also, like one of the partner is suffering from some neurotic disorder or from psychotic breakdown he or she had. And, this is hidden from the family when they get married and it comes out in the due course of time. I think this is something which is very, very serious. If the person is a schizoid personality, definitely the person would need a psychiatric intervention, a clinical psychological intervention. And there I think the family should come forward, should not hide it, should not keep it under the blanket. Mental illnesses, you have the medicines, you have the therapies, you certainly can get the professional help. But unfortunately, the taboo is still there and it reflects on the relationship.
Amaresh, this is a very important point that Jayanti has brought up, and that is the mental state, not only of one person, but also sometimes of the accuser, the person who's making the accusations.
Precisely.
And then how do you handle that? Because if somebody is actually claiming that they are victims of domestic violence, can the other side, the people who are accused, move the court and say, we want a mental evaluation of that particular person? Because it would be looked upon perhaps as hanging on to straws or trying to malign the person who's accusing the other party.
In fact, in the criminal justice dispensation system, all these provisions are there.
Does it happen?
Yes, all these provisions are there.
No, but does it happen?
Yeah, it happens.
Oh, it does?
Yeah,
Okay.
it happens. And Mr. Bahl, you had pointed out the right thing. You said there has to be a balance. Now, that balance is very, very important. That if we leave these matters to investigating agencies, if we leave these matters to courts to do the work and, look at all these offenses and things like that, things would be much better. Sometimes, public pressure has a detrimental effect. It makes the matter very, very convoluting.
Amreshji, I will have a request to you that in the forum it should be mandatory whenever these kind of cases come, go for a physical checkup as well as a detailed psychological checkup, because they usually don't come out in the open easily. So you need to have a professional intervention. And if wherever you have these kind of domestic violence cases, my feeling is over the decades I've been seeing that it should be mandatory, from the court side, that they are subjected to not only biological or physical evaluation, but also a detailed psychological evaluation from the mental health point of view.
I would like to agree and mention here that just one thing, because since we have been in this field, we work with women who are working in the garment and textile sector, who work in the supply chain industry. They come from different parts of India, UP, Bihar, settled in different areas of Delhi, and then work in the supply chain industry. Because one person's earning is not helpful for the family to survive. So the women started working as an unskilled worker or a semi-skilled worker like that. For example, if a wife or if a husband is paranoid of certain thing, these are never talk subject, but this paranoid situation comes up and goes down. It's for example, many women whom we have interacted with, they do not come that I'm facing domestic violence. They do not say that, but I have a problem. We just say that my husband, since I go to factory, since I go to company and work, and then sometimes I talk with male colleagues, or male colleagues sometimes calls because of work, or we told them not to like that, and since you are going their work, you are talking and interacting with males like that, that my husband suspects me that I'm having an extramarital affair, or I'm having this affair. So what do you think? At the same time also, if I ask him, okay, that if you are suspecting me that I will stay in the house, I will look after the children, you earn, that also is not sufficient. I am between two rocks, what to do. So this mental, how this setup has come. But one thing that I would agree with Dr. Jayanti, that mental aspect is never talked, because we have son, like they have not gone to litigation, but we have realized that the husband also do have a mental this problem, and sometimes the women also have that. So we said that we better like counsel a psychologist or a counselor. These things to say, but in between, marriage is like think that once we are married means like we have to abide by everything, whatever thing is situation, because it's like a two-way process, both from the husband and wife, because ideas change, context change.
Word of caution.
Yes.
Once, if you have a person claiming that he is or she is suspicious, suspicion does not mean the person turns into a paranoid schizophrenia. It is a very complicated terminology, and paranoia or paranoid schizophrenia, it's not so easily diagnosed. Suspicion you can have. Having a suspicion does not make the person complaining about it paranoid patient. So there has to be, one has to trade with a lot of caution.
This is where this whole subject is, a very fine balance.
Yes.
Because everything from being a very caring person to being overbearing to being abusive is just one step away.
Yes.
Amaresh, the problem with litigation is that it is not only expensive, it is burning the candle at two ends. So people concentrate on their work. On the other hand, lawyers and fees and all that running around is also expensive. So it takes quite a hit on the family. Do you think that such an idea, if it can be put out, like there is a mediation center in some courts, and judges do tend to push people towards mediation and resolution, but more on a grassroots level, do you think that this should be a system that could be adopted?
No, in fact, Mr. Bahl, you answered your own question. You talked about mediation and all that, and let me tell you, there are mediation institutions at all levels, and courts are really encouraging mediation, at all levels, and it has been very, very fruitful. And let me tell you, in that breath, there's a judgment by the Honorable Supreme Court where they say that the principal justice to cause is equivalent to the salt of ocean should be kept in mind. The court of law is bound to uphold the truth which sparkles when justice is done. And that Supreme Court has said this in context of a domestic violence case. So, things are really improving. It's just that people have to have patience. Right balance has to be struck. People have to be little constrained when it comes to passing verdicts and jumping to conclusions, and things will really improve.
So what would you like to see, Elizabeth, change in the near future, which could at least stop this terrible problem that we have from growing?
After the Domestic Violence Act came into implementation in 2005, it seems like gender-based violence or domestic violence increased a lot in India. It's because the reporting has increased. So what we are favoring is that, as Dr. Jayanti also said, that gender sensitization with gender equality and the context of socio-cultural, economic, lifestyle changing. This should be very much counseled and understood from the familial level.
I think the last word I would say that please focus on the gender equality when dealing with such cases. Don't have that tilted bias towards a particular gender. Whosoever is guilty, we will punish that person, not as per se by whether it's a female or it's a male person.
At the end of the day, I think we all agree, correct me if I'm wrong, but we all agree that the guilty must be punished, but at the same time, the law must not be misused.
Yes.
On the other hand, we must try and look for resolution right at the start and not stop looking for resolution, even if the matter has reached court. Jayanti, Elizabeth, and Amaresh, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you so much.
You were listening to our national program of talks in which the topic of the panel discussion was the bane of domestic violence. The participants were Dr. Jayanti Dutta, leading clinical psychologist, Miss Elizabeth Khumallambam, women's rights activist, Amaresh Singh, leading lawyer, and Vickram Bahl, media personality,
who initiated and moderated this panel discussion. Produced and presented by Naveen K. Gupta of All India Radio Delhi, this program came to you from the Delhi station of All India Radio.